Ralph, my friend, I'm honored to have you on Cars and Culture, particularly because if there's one person whom I know personifies both cars and culture, it's you.
Thank
Welcome
you,
to the
Jake.
program.
Very kind of you. Happy to be here.
You're the first designer that I've had on this program, and I'm honored. You and I go back a long way.
Hmm.
And I'll be honest, when I think of Ralph Gilles, I do think of culture. I think of all of the culture that you bring to the automotive industry, and I think of how if one needs to meet somebody who is immersed in that culture and needs to be a part of that world in order to do their job so effectively, it's you. And if anything, don't designers need to be on the cutting edge of culture anyway?
Well, we're kind of insular people. I mean, we work in secrecy. We typically work about 4.5 years ahead of the market. So we can never talk about what we're working on, which because it's
It's
always top
true.
secret. So it makes us kind of loners. And I'll never forget what happened to me is back in 2005 and a half. I was just a newbie to Facebook. I'd just gotten on Facebook, and people were talking about I was joining these forums. I was curious to understand how people understood the 300C back then. And I was on these forums, and one of the guys on the forum was like, "Oh, Ralph must make $1 million a year. He's a big shot designer." And I wrote back, like I was lurking the whole time. I wrote back, "No, I don't. I make like oh." And then they found me, and then they invited me. I went to I went to an LX, the very first LX meet, the 300 Club meet in California, and that's when it hit me how big this thing really is.
Truly. How important is culture to you? Pop culture, music culture, fashion, industrial design, technology, science. It's endless, right?
Yeah, I think every industry has a culture and then the subculture, right? So you got within the cultures, you have these movers and shakers, people that set the tone, that kind of create pop culture. We call them tastemakers in our industry. In the fashion industry, has similar things. So there's always someone pulling the puppet strings, but doing it in a way they don't even realize they're doing it, right? They're just doing what they love and what they believe is cool, and then people catch on, and then it takes off. That's part of culture. That's kind of what I would say, almost organic culture. And then you have protecting culture is what I try to do in the office. I have, at my level now, I've got a work family, I call it, and I try to create a work family dynamic versus a hierarchical one, right? So that's another type of culture that can protect the way people think, and you find it's a home, not just a job, right? So something like that. And of course, you've got, traveling the world with my job over the years, I've noticed car culture is very different country to country, and the way people see cars are different. Transportation versus, self-actualization, all you name it, right?
Which allows you, or that kind of thinking allows you to design for different markets because of your area of responsibility. Frankly, you've got to understand different cultures in different areas.
Yeah, yeah. Understand is a big word. I think fascinate by is probably more how I
Yeah.
feel. I'm always in awe of it, to be honest. When I go to China, I'm like, it changes every few years. But obviously we have studios around the world and you have people that day to day live and breathe it. But I go there just to understand it better, so I don't make the bad call, or I don't, obstruct or get in the way of something that makes sense in the local market. But
You
I
went,
believe you can export culture too, by the way, Jake.
sure.
You can give, people love, with the world shrinking because of social media, people want to taste different cultures from different worlds. Yeah.
You once said a good designer is always on the job. And you said you're stimulated to the point of collapse because when you go home all day, all you've done is observe.
Yeah.
And you're always looking and asking, and why did that woman buy that car? And you're observing how hard it is to put the stroller in the trunk. You, right? Your brain
Yeah.
can't really turn off, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it's funny. One of the assignments I gave my staff when we started the Pacifica years ago, I said, go to Costco or any, local store, Target, one of those big shops, and just sit in your car and observe people for a few hours, watching them struggle with their strollers and their carts and all that. And it doesn't have to be minivan owners. And that has stuck around, this idea of observing, trying to figure out what the latent needs are. What are people needing that they don't realize they need? And you could do that just walking the street, or you can do it talking to friends at a party. That's where I get a lot of my stuff now, is just striking up conversation with perfect strangers, and they don't know who I am, and they just start, and I ask them, what car do you drive? What do you like about it? So I guess I'm always, to your point, fact finding and trying to understand a little deeper.
It must have been harder to do during a pandemic. You're not
Yeah.
going to a lot of parties, number
Yeah.
one, and you're probably not seeing a lot of people. I mean,
That's true.
later on, I want to get into a little bit about how you design during a pandemic, but as it relates to that aspect that you just said,
Mhm.
was it a lot harder? I mean, you become so much more insular during the course of the last 18 to 20 months. As a designer, you must have been at least aching to go for a longer walk than usual.
Yeah, in the first few months, it's exactly right. It was kind of almost like I was starving, like a fish on the beach, not in the water, kind of thing, right? And then all of a sudden, the social media just went into hyperdrive. Myself and others, people creating more videos, and TikTok started to really take off, and the ability to consume an amazing amount of culture. Because I kind of used to try to squeeze a little social media in. Now I was able to really use it as another antenna to figure out what's going on, and I stuck around. I really probably spent a little too much time surfing and consuming social media just because it's just an incredibly powerful source of culture read.
Car designers in general need to be so forward thinking. You just mentioned, at the outset here that you're thinking 4 to 5 years down the road. You can't share any details, but you're ahead of the curve.
Mm-hmm.
So to what extent do you look at other industries in order to help you get ahead of the automotive curve? You once said that you take design cues from other fast moving industries like mobile phones.
Yeah, the tech industry, of course, is way ahead. I find other countries sometimes, like Singapore, is the future today. There's a lot of facets of how they're solving for crowded spaces and the last mile, and how we're going to move around in the future with maybe more urban solutions for mobility. That stuff fascinates me. And even in China, where the electric movement is really fast. I mean, it's almost overnight. Cars are becoming electrified. And America is unique. Every state has its own flavor. Within the state, you've got subcultures of a city versus urban. It's amazing how different the U.S. can be just a few miles driving. So yeah, honestly, our heads are exploding trying to understand that. And then there's South America, where we do very well in South America, and it's progressed rapidly from where it was just 5 years ago to now. So it's really it's enough to make your head spin. But you got to take it all in, right?
Absolutely. You've said that you're surrounded by artists and creative people all the time. You're also very naturally positive. I've known you for a long time. I know that. But you're always believing that the next best thing is coming, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's two sides of the same coin to some extent, right, Ralph? The coolest car you've not yet designed,
Yeah.
but every night wondering whether you've just come up with your last great idea.
Exactly.
Is
Yeah.
that correct?
Yeah. You nailed it. That's my problem, right? So at night you toss and turn, going, "Oh no, I'm running out of ideas." And I always had that feeling, and I think all designers have that sensation. Am I done? Is this it? But then something sparks an idea, or a new hire comes up with an innocent idea that you wouldn't have thought of because you have too many things in your mind. So yeah, and I'm old enough now to realize it does pass. I think it comes and goes. You got good days, bad days, and when you least expect it, ta-da, an idea pops in your head.
It's like an artist thinking that they've written their last song, isn't it?
Exactly. But that's why you surround yourself with great talent. And I've had a few summers where we haven't hired anyone at all, just because they didn't feel right. Right. So we basically only hire who we believe is a unicorn. We only hire unicorns, and
Hmm.
it has its problems. So we're probably a little too lean, but at the same time, the work that we do get is great. We're excited by that.
How many applications do you typically get to be a unicorn?
Well, it's the other way around. We go shopping at all the universities. More so now, we're going to outside of the classic car design schools. We're going to Carnegie Mellon's and looking for infotainment designers and different types of skill sets. But it's actually more about them finding us right now, is because there's not enough young people to go around. To be honest with you, it's probably a really good time to graduate top of your field, because everyone wants new talent right now. So it's trying to make us more appealing as a company. COVID taught us a lot of things. We're being a lot more flexible, as most corporations have adapted very quickly to new working styles, and it's gone over very well. And then we're trying to do that without losing go back to the culture thing, right? How do you keep that going while you spend so much time apart?
You get a lot of letter writers to you personally. You know where I'm going.
Yeah, yeah, that's okay.
Let's talk a little bit about your background.
Yeah.
You are the personification of, I think, the ultimate cultural experience. Your parents came from Haiti. You're born in New York. You grew up near Montreal, which one would argue is the cultural capital of North America to some extent, with the mix of cultures that exist there. How did your experiences there shape you?
Wow, that's a very, Montreal is a melting pot for people who haven't seen it. Please do yourself a favor and spend a few days there. It's an amazing city, a lot of very European, yet very Canadian, and has some American twist. It would change a lot. In the winter, it was miserable, just like every other Canadian. But in the summer, it would come alive. The Formula One circus would come to town every year. And with that, all these incredible cars would come from the Northeast out of New York, and upstate, this or that, or Buffalo, wherever, and even Toronto. And it would be like a car show. So growing up as a kid, for a week solid, being stimulated by that, and the car culture in general. There's a big car culture in Montreal, so I grew up around that. But there's also food culture, architectural culture, music. Jazz Fest is there
The
every year.
language alone.
Yeah, exactly. You got Greeks and Armenians, and an amazing mix of humans. And with that comes a variety of tastes. You got classic stuff, and you got modern stuff. Very modern city. The architecture tends to lean modern on the new stuff. So yeah, it was a great place to grow up, and it's in me for the rest of my life.
As a boy, you loved to draw. You would spend your summers, though, over the border, the other side of the border in New York,
Yep.
visiting your aunt and uncle. You worked at a local supermarket. You unloaded produce, right, as a
How
boy.
do you know all this stuff? Wow.
But the sleepy town brought out the best in you
Yeah.
from a.
So I set in New York, in the Long Island. I used to spend the summers in my dearly departed Aunt Giselle
Hmm.
basement, and I didn't really have too many friends. I would do that produce. It was an older town. The town was kind of a very sleepy, near almost retirement type town. So at night I would just sketch and sketch and sketch, and she really thought that was fascinating, that I would work all day and then come home and work again, just drawing.
So it's around 1987. You're 17.
Yeah.
And let's talk about now a letter, the aforementioned letter that I just mentioned, people writing to you. This is a legendary story, but I'm sure there are some out here who have not heard it. At the time, Lee Iacocca is running Chrysler.
Yep.
If you can find a better car, buy it, he said on
Yep.
TV at the time.
All the time. Yeah.
And your dear aunt sees you drawing and sees Mr. Iacocca on television. And what does she say to you?
She says, "Let's send him your drawings," just like that. I'm like, "What?" And it's honestly, it sounds crazy as a kid. I'm going to send this guy on TV my drawings. Why would he ever care? But she wasn't kidding. She actually called up Chrysler. She found the headquarters, and they gave her an address to the head of design at the time. I think it was Tom Gale and Neil Walling. And we sure enough, we put some samples in, put a letter together, and the letter mostly said, "Hey, my nephew loves car design. He wants to be a car designer." And they wrote back. They wrote back within a few weeks, and this was hard mail times, right? Not emails, of course. And it said Neil Walling, who I ended up working for 10 years later.
He hired you.
Yeah, he did. It's crazy, and he recommended the schools. But to be honest, Jason, even then, it seemed far fetched to me. I love the letter. I kind of tucked it away. I didn't think much. It still felt impossible. It felt like it was just out of reach. It was too expensive. Number one, the school was very expensive to a Canadian kid who was in Detroit. So I just went back to wanting to be an engineer, at the time.
But he wrote something at the bottom of that letter. He said your portfolio does show significant promise.
Yes. And I found that letter again later on when my dad passed away. It was in his effects, and I since then lost it and found it again, and I framed it this time. It's in my
Now it's
office.
in your office.
And I read that a lot because it reminds me not to forget to answer letters I get like that. I get a lot of those kind of letters, and for the most part, we answer every one of them, or at least call them up now if we can, or email them and tell them the same thing. Here are the schools you can go to, and don't dream big. You never know. So yeah, I'm really, really grateful for that.
But your aunt wasn't happy. She wanted Lee Iacocca to actually write.
He's like, how come he didn't, on behalf of Lee Iacocca, because his name was CC'd at the bottom of the letter.
So, so you said at the time, well, okay, this is great. There could be something here.
Yeah.
But your brother actually, Max, is the one who pushed you a little further.
Well, as the story goes, I went to school. I graduated from high school in the 11th grade, as typical Canadians do. And then I went to CEGEP, which is like a pre-college. So I did engineering, trigonometry. I hated it and dropped out after a month. And I went back to produce, what I knew, right? I found a store and I started unloading, this time hardware, not produce. And started working and got promoted really quickly. And my brother came home. This is now 4 months I'm working hardware. So my parents have given up on me, said, okay, this kid, he's lost the plot. And my brother came home for spring break and he goes, "What are you doing with your life? Where's that letter?" He remembers because the letter was a big deal. Our whole family talked about this letter from Chrysler.
Sure.
And my brother, told me to, go call up a school again and see what it takes. And they said, "Well, you need portfolio pieces." And we stayed up all night. First time in my life I ever had coffee, by the way. He made, I don't know how many pots of coffee. We stayed up 5 days straight, sketched my brains out, and came out with 10 pieces rolled them up in a tube and FedExed it to CCS. And
At the art table in the basement of your home, you're doing supercars, you're doing current cars, you're just
everything.
drawing like crazy, right?
Yeah, it was crazy. And we stayed up all night. We literally, to make the deadline, we stayed up. I think we didn't sleep for 3 days. We just kept drawing. And my parents had bought me an art table, like an architect style table. So I had that. They tried to, support my fledgling car design dreams.
As did Max.
Yeah.
So you go to the College for Creative Studies in Detroit. It's an amazing experience for you, right? Because now all of a sudden you're surrounded by people who are just like you. They're great artists. They can and now there's a pathway.
Exactly. And not to heighten myself, but I felt like I went to the X-Men mansion. Everybody was amazing. In high school, I was like one of the best sketchers, and I thought I was all that in a bag of chips. But then you go to CCS and you're just humbled by the talent level. And of course, it brings you up. That's one of the great things about schools like CCS. You just get better when you're surrounded with that level of talent. And that's exactly what happened. I just hit a second gear, another gear, and it was amazing. And I'm still friends with most of the people I went to school with. Yeah.
So the letters and the pathway then at Chrysler in those days, 1992, you're actually led to the point where you're hired and you're working under Tom Gale, and he's the lead designer of the 91 Dodge Stealth, the 92 Viper, the '01 Plymouth Prowler, just to name a few. And you approach him one day and you say spontaneously, "Hey, what can I do to be the head of design someday?" And you remember that day?
Yeah, yeah.
What did Tom do? What did he say to
Well,
you?
a few things. He was a unique person because people that know Tom, he has an engineering degree and he has a master's in business and a design degree. So he started describing himself. He thought I was very young at the time. I was just barely there 5-6 years. And he mentored me in a way. He said, "You know what, Ralph, if you want to, you can consider getting a second degree, and that'll help you understand the business." Because I've always been fascinated by the whole business, not just design. I really am completely amazed by the auto industry as a type of business. So I did that. I followed his advice and went back to school. Now, this was not the greatest time of my life because I was having kids. I just got promoted to being a director of the rear drive studio, and it was a lot, but man, it was the best thing I ever did. I really look back on that advice from him and said, wow. And it was also being curious, deconstructing the car. And that's what Tom Gill did so well. He was able to negotiate with engineers in a way that they could never deny him. And then we got fat, cab forward cars before everybody else. We had 20-inch wheels on a Ram truck before anyone else. We had all kinds of stuff that was, at the time, we didn't know we were doing it, but we were breaking the mold in a lot of ways for this upstart company called Chrysler.
Well, in fact, the 300C, which most people will remember, if not for the vehicle itself, but for the people who drove the vehicle, the P. Diddy's of the world and the all the rap. I mean, this became, it was almost like Pimp My Ride in motion, and you're a part of that car, and you're a part of the team to create. Really, at the time, was Chrysler's resurgence to some extent. It had to be exciting at the time.
It was, but it was a company that I've always, again, I'm a student, even though the letter was one of the reasons I worked there, but I grew up around the time the Viper came out as a concept car. I remember that car going to the Detroit Motor Show in '89 and going, whoa, and I'm 19 years old. I'm still halfway through school. And then they kept doing it, right? The Prowler, as you said, so they always had these amazing concept cars. The road cars were a little, maybe not as advanced, but the concept, so the potential was there. You could always taste the potential of the company. And the 300, I give Freeman Thomas a lot of credit. He saw the potential of this format of car, because if you think about the Atlantique, the 300 concept car, we're toying around with these rear drive grand American cars because Tom Gale would go to concours shows like Pebble Beach and things like that. And he was always enamored by these amazing cars from the 40s and 30s. And that was always in his blood. Even the 50s had some amazing, the Chrysler, the first generation 300. So we always wonder, where did we lose our way? Chrysler was known for engineering and powerful car. So we wanted to bring that back. And I got it right away. I was like, oh yeah, hello. And then put 20s on it. That was my contribution, the biggest grill we can get, and 20-inch wheels, and make the windows really tiny, and away we go. And I'll never forget when he was on, I think it was Jay-Z put it on his video on the MTV Music Awards. He had a 300 with scissor doors came on. The car had just come out. And the hip hop industry just fell in love with the car because you could put 20s on and 22-inch wheels. No one else could do it at the time.
Well, and that was the time too that, the Cadillac Escalades were attracting a ton of attention as well. I mean, there was this American resurgence of the car to some extent, the car or the SUV.
Yeah.
And you were, this American Canadian Haitian kid credited with saving one of the big three from self-destruction. I mean,
Oh,
this is
that's a
this
lot.
is
I
what
don't know.
people said.
A lot of unsung heroes. Bob Hubbock, one of the greatest sketchers there. A lot of great people behind that car. But if I did anything, I just protected it. There was other themes that were competing for it. If you remember, the 300M was
Yes.
also, they were thinking about just evolving that design. But the car spoke to me, and we took it to clinic, and it fired on different parts of the brain. I mean, people saw through all the other stuff and saw pleasant memories of their best times in America. And that's what turned me on. I'm like, I've always observed American culture from a Canadian perspective as something fascinating and big, larger than life. Why not have a car that made you feel that way for one fifth the cost of a Bentley?
And a lot of Bentley owners got out of their Bentleys and got into the Chrysler 300, which was
Oh yeah,
wild at the time.
yeah.
You were labeled many different things, and I know a lot of this is uncomfortable for you, but it is written in history. People Magazine called you the sexiest man in Detroit.
Oh god.
You were known. Time Magazine called you Chrysler's Bling King, a black-white knight who speaks both country club and hip hop.
Oh my gosh, I forgot all that stuff.
And the media clips really talked a lot about love, luck, and destiny, and from slacker to superstar, the Ralph Gilles story.
Well, you did your homework, huh?
And I mean, all of a sudden, it's "Pimp My Ride," and
Yeah.
you were really on an ascension.
Yeah, and I never thought of it at the time. I mean, I always thought it was a someone else's life. I really did. It was fascinating to be in the middle of it. And what ended up happening is a lot of people thought I'd get a big head over it. But honestly, with my values as a Canadian and the way I was raised, I just shrugged it all off as being, oh, that's entertaining. And because I was already on to the next project. I was always thinking about the next thing. So it was fascinating. And yes, it did help it got me a lot of time outside of work because I ended up speaking at a lot of local high schools. I went to inner city schools. A lot of people were wanting to hear my story. I had local news stations out in Chicago calling me, and just amazing opportunities came from that. And I try to always convert it back to helping the next Ralph Gilles or the next young kid to come up to dream big. It's always been my motto is dream big. You never know, right? You just never know. So I try to use that whatever you want to call it, fame, that 20 minutes of fame or 2 minutes of fame, and convert it into something positive that would help others. But it's never been about that to me. I don't really care. You know me for
Of course.
it's great, but it's not something I hang my head on at all. In fact, I actually have deflected all the interviews to my staff now. I don't do media anymore because I want them to do it. I want them to learn how to do it because the company relied on me almost too much. I was actually doing so much of it that I felt I was not able to get my work done. So I started trying to delegate it more.
For
It was
sure.
fun. It was fun. I enjoyed it. I love telling the story, but honestly, because I think it helps to sell cars and hopefully build Chrysler. And
Another huge influence comes into your life around that time, and it's the merger. This time not of Daimler and Chrysler, but it's Fiat and Chrysler.
yeah,
And a large influence is a gentleman named Sergio Marchionne,
oh,
the late Sergio Marchionne, who was many things. You certainly could articulate it better than I could in terms of his impact on the business. One of what I would argue one of a handful of car executives throughout the last century who really left an unmistakable imprint on a couple of car companies that he worked to merge together. But what did he mean to you?
oof. I mean, to put it in a word, 3 years on, we still talk about him. Still,
Mm.
we're always referencing him. Not and some people didn't know him closely, but the management team, who are obviously owe him everything. Every time we get together, there's a Sergioism that comes up. There's a recalled memory. It just the impression he left. He taught you hard. I mean, he was like a tough love father in a way. I saw him more as a mentor elder than I did a boss. It was the strangest relationship. But he loved us, but could beat us beat us senseless in a business fashion. Didn't like underperformance, didn't like failure, didn't like egos, none of that. So he straightened us all. Not that there was much of that to deal with in the first place, because he handpicked the management team. I mean, honestly, for the first year or two, it was very scary because people would just vaporize. Uh, but then everything stabled, and then we got to know each other really well. We do a lot of board meetings in London together and Amsterdam. Spent a lot of time on the plane with him. Got to know him well as a person. And finally, he had a party at his house. He'd been building this house for 6, 7 years, and he finally had a nice party. Until he passed away, honestly, it was just an awe to watch him operate. Just the faith he had in himself, the confidence. It's like he would, like a Babe Ruth, he would point out to out there and say, "We're going to hit the ball out there. Trust me, we're going to be number one in truck. We're going to be number one here." He would give us these things that we've never heard another CEO say. I mean, keep in mind, we had just come through. You skipped over Cerberus. Thank you, by the way. We had gone through private equity, which was the opposite. It was like if it wasn't bolted down, we'd sell it. And he said, "No, no, 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 no. We're going to take all these brands. We're going to make them great again, basically." So,
what would most people not know about Sergio Marchionne that you could share?
wow, he was sensitive. He is this, he has this tough bear hugging kind of guy on the outside. He's funny as all get out. I mean, people saw some of his humor on the analyst calls. He would have a few quips, but he was truly funny. I mean, we would sit there in the middle of these serious board meetings. He would stop the meeting and start pulling up YouTube videos, and we're laughing our brains out, or he would watch Formula One. We'd stop a meeting and watch the entire Formula One race, just
Wow.
in the middle of a Sunday, a lot of weekend meetings, but stuff like that. He'd play poker. He'd play a brand of poker I've never seen. It was like a savant playing poker. Just amazing stuff. And a great driver too. One of the first times I met him, we were at Boloco. The entire management team's waiting on him. Helicopter comes. A black Enzo pulls up to the helicopter. He comes out of the plane, puts out a cigarette, jumps in the car, disappears for about 20 minutes. All you hear is the shriek of that engine, that full song.
Wow.
I was like, "That's my boss." Yeah.
You mentioned the influence. He also pushed you up.
Yeah.
He was truly an advocate for you, Ralph.
He was. He gave me a lot of, especially in the first few years, we had a lot of dinners together. He was using me as a way to come up to speed really fast. He knew I was well connected. I was young because a lot of guys left that were, my contemporaries, because they were older and they left. So I was one of the last guys left from the old team and part of the new team. So a lot of data transfer happened. He wanted to understand the culture, the company. So we spent a lot of time together. But then he started giving me jobs. I mean, he gave me head of motorsport. I was head of Dodge at the time. I was CEO of Dodge. He had me create an SRT brand, plus still doing design. And then eventually he gave me head of all design, the global, including Maserati, Alfa Romeo, Fiat. And then on top of that, he put me on the GEC, the Global Executive Council. So I'm like, oh my gosh. I mean, it was.
Were you sleeping?
No, actually not. That's a fact. I would never sleep because my phone would be ringing at night for the European stuff. So yeah, it was tough for about 7-8 years there. I had no life to speak of, just working. But I learned a lot. I really wouldn't change anything.
Favorite moments during all of those iterations?
Well, I mean, honestly, selfishly, we had a board meeting in Ferrari, and at the lunch hour, he parked the not yet released 488 out there. We had an F12 and an F12 TDF. And he looked at the management team. He pointed at the head of engineering, Harold Wester, and myself, says, "Okay, you two can drive. The other ones have to go with test drivers." It was the best day of my life. I got to drive a TDF at full song around Maranello for basically 25 minutes. It was amazing. It was like, but that's a selfish moment. Many. There's too many to mention. Just amazing teachers, great stories, lessons learned. But the brevity in the middle of these most stressful, things are falling apart. We're having issues with, debt and everything. And he would always find a joke to tell. He would just bring up the teams. He would keep us stuck together with his humor, his wit, his lovely recounting of Berlusconiisms and things like that. He was very up on current events, so we would talk a lot about that.
Well, he was encyclopedic. Somebody once said to me that he could talk about actions at the World Bank as well as he could talk about healthcare in Africa as well as he could talk about a Ferrari.
Super learned man. I mean, really good economic genius. You name it. Just a hell of a man. But he didn't watch his health. That's the only thing. He didn't have time to take care of himself. So it's sad.
Yeah. When we look at where you are now, you've now gone through another iteration, and there's now another ownership group and another merger, and you're now part of the fourth, fifth iteration of what Chrysler was.
Not anymore. Something like 5, I think.
Right, exactly.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about what life is like now as Stellantis.
It's very different. I mean, I have a lot of respect for Carlos Tavares and Mike Manley before him. He took over the helm at a very difficult time. 2 years under Mike was amazing. He's still around. He's still doing the North American CEO job. The team is learning. It's adapting, and I'm used to it. No one's phased, to be honest with you. When we merged officially in January, Nobody on the management team or even my working team, nobody was fazed by it. It was okay. We're actually, I hate to say it, but we're used to it. We're comfortable with, we're okay with change. We know the brands are strong, and at the end of the day, the brands always win. We're always caretakers of the brands. That's how I see my life. I caretake these brands and then pass them on to the next generation of leaders. So yeah, we haven't skipped a beat, honestly. And Carlos brings an incredible amount. I mean, he's the ultimate automotive CEO. I mean, he's been a CEO, professional CEO for years. He's worked in many majors. So he has a lot of insights that you could never get. You know, he's worked for the Japanese. He was worked for the French for many years. So he brings a great perspective, and he's open minded, which I like. And he's also a racer. So he's got
Yes, as well. Yes.
a very accomplished. Lots of people don't know him, but he's an accomplished open wheel racer,
Mhm.
vintage racer, rally racer. And so that gives him a leg up. He understands the car intrinsically. So it's been
So
great.
we go back to your first days, and you've got a very traditional American leadership team back at Chrysler Corporation.
Yep.
Then you go through the Germans, and you draw a little bit lessons there.
Yep.
You talk about private equity, which is a whole different animal, as you
Yep.
alluded to. Then we get into the Italians, and now you're into the French. I mean, this is the
It's
ultimate global
wild.
citizen.
It really is, and there's bits of me that are have been permanently affected by each one of those things you describe, and it's given me a view on it that you can't even. There's no way I could replicate this. It's an incredible cocktail and a few of my contemporaries who are just now starting to retire because I'm about 10 years younger than most of my contemporaries. And yeah, we're bonded by this forever. We have this incredible journey that executives. It's unique to us in a way, but we love it. It makes you stronger. It makes you open-minded, and nothing phases us. I mean, bring it. Even COVID, we handled that so quickly.
Then you throw a pandemic into the mix.
We didn't let anybody go. Unfortunately, some contracts got suspended, but not a single direct employee. I mean, just sales didn't skip a beat. I mean, nothing. I mean, the company sailed through that with a lot of good leadership and decisions. And
So
wasn't
what
easy.
did you borrow from each one of those regimes that you were a
Ooh.
part of? Pick one thing.
Oh man, Jason, now you're getting into psychology because I learned a lot what not to do
Hmm.
versus what to do. I know it sounds strange, but how not to treat people because I've seen some bad leaderships, and you hear at my, I was young enough to hear what the working level would say about what they saw because the perception of what you command from the top, the bottoms up, top up, top down, bottoms up. If you don't do it carefully, it's just top down, and people don't respond well to that. So I've learned to make sure it's a bottoms up swell versus a top down directive, right? So they once they understand what the vision is, then people will always rally and make it happen. But if you just tell them to do it, that's not going to work, right?
Right.
So I go out of my way to educate my team on why we're doing what we're doing, how we're doing it, what's the end result, what's the big picture, right?
Hmm.
And you always get better results.
Yeah. You had to navigate COVID. Let's get into a little bit of that. You and I have talked previously, but just share with me again the idea of trying to design during COVID, because naturally, in my own mind, I see these amazing artists who are able to put together vehicles of the future while sharing thoughts in a
Mhm.
space where you're working elbow to elbow with a fellow designer, and somebody says, well, take the rake on that window down maybe a little further. Now all of a sudden you're locked up and
Yeah.
you're at your home office. You told me once, you said, I think they got more creative during COVID, they being your fellow artists.
I want to take the opportunity to shout out to the UAW, by the way, because they kept the lights on making the cars
Hmm.
while we were learning how to redesign them. So we knew the front of the business was being taken care of. So now we had to get into the brass tacks of designing. So what we did is, we got everyone their computers. We had a tech day and had everyone come in and grab their favorite materials and tools, and they all set up home offices. And before too long, to your point, and what we talked about is the work was really good because there was very little distraction, but the cross pollination was not as good, and the reviews were almost too curated at my level, right? Everything, because I used to walk through studios and see little sketches that no one thought I would like, and that's the one I pick,
Yeah.
So to unlearn, don't curate so much. So let's keep this organic, and then we adopted tools that we've always had and never used. We engaged Gravity Sketch, a great tool where designers can sketch together. They actually put ocular glasses on. You have 5 6 designers in each in their own homes designing on the same car, pulling and pulling the shape. It's amazing. So new technology like that, we're thirsting for and starting to really adapt it much quicker than we would have otherwise. But then we started milling. So went back to the office a few months back, right after winter and started milling some of these things that were cooking digitally. And we had a few Picassos. I'm not going to lie. We had some that were a little crooked, some cars that looked a little funky. We had to, but that's what we do. Go in there and
Rear
tweak.
lights are on the roof now.
We call it scalosis, right? Sometimes it's hard to feel the scale in a digital space.
Yeah,
So that's why we always end up putting in 3D and taking it outside and looking at it. So I think we found a happy medium where there's a lot of the digital world that we're going to keep because it's faster and people love sketching, especially in the ideation phase when they're kind of zoning out and they just want to sketch and be left alone. Designers love being at home, but then when we go to 3D, we got to start getting in the studio again.
Did you think that design was pulled forward? Was it held back? Was the process did the process change at all? In other words, was it lengthier because of COVID?
A little bit. I would say, if anything, quicker, because we're more focused when we review. I mean, everyone's looking at the same sketch. Everyone gets time. They take longer. The reviews actually take longer because we go through person by person now. So we've actually learned that everyone has a voice now. That's one of the benefits of these digital meetings is when you're listening to someone, everyone's tuned in. Everyone's muted. Only that person's mic is on. So we've actually had these soft-spoken designers that are now being heard on the front stage and like, whoa, someone's listening to me. And it equalizes everybody. There's no manager, no one, you don't feel the layers because in a live meeting, there's people at the back of the room, that are trying to stay out of the way. So this is good. I actually like it.
How will COVID change the way that car design is done?
We're looking at simple things like UV. We have it on the truck now. We're looking at UV cleaning devices for your phone while it's sitting there, be stored. You keep things clean. We're looking at entire cars that self-clean themselves because some cars are sometimes loaded out in rental or whatever. So we're looking at that. At cleanability, one of the things I asked my staff to think about the next interiors is make sure they're super easy to wipe down. Radiuses and the way you have nooks and crannies and things along there. But overall, I don't think it's going to change too much because keep in mind, again, we're designing 3-4 years from now. And what we have noticed is that people have rediscovered the automobile, if anything, right? So they know that, hey, it's not a bad form of mobility, especially to go see part of the country you've never seen before. So we're looking, we're number one in campers in Europe because of that. People have rediscovered camping again. And it's also happening here. Our heavy duty sales is unbelievable.
Miles driven with the family that those in your family well, where they've been, and you're going to hang with them now. Yeah. You have a new vehicle coming out that's a very important vehicle, just recently launched. You've been all over social media with it, the Jeep Wagoneer.
Yeah.
It's an important vehicle for you, right?
It's important for us for
the company.
Yeah, the company, but also the country. There isn't anyone I've met so far that hasn't heard of the Wagoneer as the folklore of Wagoneer. It's been in movies. It's someone has a story. Was in a Wagoneer, uncle had one, and that kind of stuff is similar to the 300, where there's a story. There's an Americana about it that we don't take lightly. By the way, we know that when you hear Wagoneer, there's a dauntingness to it. We already have owners of the old one that want the new one to have next to the old one, but we didn't set out to create an evolutionary one that looks or reminds you of the original. It was more the panache. The Wagoneer was, at the time, it was the most luxurious thing you could get. There was nothing to go to Hamptons in back in those days, unless, in terms of taking a whole family with gear and towing a boat. That was it. The Suburban was there, but it was more of a utilitarian machine, as was the Land Rover and all that. So yeah, we kind of started this luxury thing, and when we set out to create this one, we wanted to amp that up again. Right? What's the most luxurious thing that's ever come out of this company? And that's the new Wagoneer. I mean, it is, when you check out the details, we went to town on it. We had so much fun working on that.
Yeah, it was funny. You actually said that you had a few themes that were emulating the last version from 1991.
Yeah.
Unbelievably, 30 years ago. But you said it was almost too retro. So you got off that bandwagon.
And Sergio didn't like it. He killed it. He saw it instantly, goes, no, give me something new. I'm like, whoa, okay. So and we had to try. It was an itch we all had to scratch. He even understood that. And he actually had one. He had one and he sold it. And he said, I don't want that. It reminds me of my ex-wife, he used to say. So I was like, okay, that's the first time I've ever heard a project get killed because of that. So we started again, and we wanted something a little more lasting, a little cleaner that would age well. And celebrate. We have more glass on this car than you could ever imagine. It's just picture window effect when you sit in the car. It's amazing.
You said actually one of your favorite parts is the stern, as they say. You love the rear view of the vehicle, where the design team spent a lot of time trying to integrate details. the license plate frame area, the details around the rear window,
Mhm.
tasteful dashes of chrome. You said you rarely see that anymore, the way it's framed in bright work.
Yes, and as a car aficionado, I have old '60s cars, and they use chrome heavily to surround. That's how you kind of push the window in, right? But today we use it as decorative, and I'm very happy to say the Wagoneer has no spoiler on it. We try to design a car that would meet the aerodynamic requirements without a diving board spoiler. So it's very clean. It has this tailored fit look to it. I hope people get it. So far, seems like they understand it, but only time will tell.
But no wood.
Ah, I know you're gonna ask that. There's enough wood on the inside to make everyone happy, I hope.
What about the wood on the outside, Ralph?
We'll leave it to. We looked at, I'll be honest with you, we tried it. It just looks so forced and fake. And so we're hoping maybe I think the aftermarket industry.
Aftermarket,
Feel
yeah,
good.
they will go after
I
that for
wish them well, let's put it that way.
sure. You just mentioned your car collection here a moment ago. Let's get into a little bit of that. What do you own?
I own some strange stuff. I've got a few Alphas. I love Alfa Romeo, always have. Loved the brand long before we were one company. I have a 68 GTA replica, and I have a Sergio, a 74 GTV that I have completely spent the Alphaholics catalog on after a lot of negotiation with my wife. But it was a fun project, a ground up restoration. I built the wiring harness in my living room table, built the cylinder head on, a lot of stuff like that. But hats off to a company called Alphaholics in England who helped me dramatically with that. I've got a 68 Charger that's in the middle of a project with Speedcore. It's an amazing machine. It's all carbon fiber. Very cool resto mod. I can't wait. A couple Vipers. I have one race Viper and a street Viper. And I just got a 930 Porsche. Older, a 76, which that was my bedroom poster car when I was a kid. So I'm going through this nostalgic time of cars that meant something to me. And my latest project is a 205 GTI. I did an internship in France and was enamored. My boss had one, and he'd take me to lunch in it. I was just astonished at the G-forces that little thing could generate. So I vowed to eventually find a way to get one, and they're legal now to bring in the gray market. So I promptly restored that, and just having fun. Just a couple weird things.
And as a daily driver, is it the Wagoneer?
I have the new Grand Cherokee, the new
Grand Cherokee.
Yeah, I
Okay.
can't get my hands on a Wagoneer. All the execs want them, so I got pushed around. So, and then Stelvio, we love the Stelvio. It's a great car. We have the Alfa Romeo Stelvio.
You spend a lot of time on the track as well.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit about that. How many weekends a month? Probably not enough.
Not enough. So the best summer ever was probably 16 outings. That was a few years back. A typical would be maybe eight or nine track days a year. It's important to me. I actually love the prep as much as the track day itself. I love the community when you get there. There's always friends that you've talked to all year and you meet again. But I love it. It's cathartic. I did wheel to wheel years ago. I did the Viper X series. I did Spec Neon for a little while. I did a lot. I've done every driver school you could put your hand on. I did Tim O'Neill's. I did Bondurant, did Barber. I love that stuff. I got so tired of getting speeding tickets when I was 17, 18 years old. I said, let's keep it on the track. So I don't ever do anything on the streets. I do always race. It's safer and fun.
And the Mila Miglia.
Yes. Oh, I forgot to mention it. Yeah.
How many times have you done that?
Only once, and I can't wait to do it again someday. But that was a trip of a lifetime. It was a spontaneous thing. A driver dropped out, and my friend called me. Larry Webster called me, and I didn't know the car I was driving was worth that much. I just jumped in it. This very rare 1900 Zagato. No idea this thing was almost worth $2 million, and I'm throwing it around sideways and having a time of my life. And after the words, like, wait a minute, I have to work the rest of my life to pay that off if I wrecked it. But we had a good time. So
you are an enormous advocate for diversity within your own organization. You've played a significant role in the Fiat Chrysler African American Network and the Chrysler Global Diversity Council, encouraging and supporting inclusion within the company. Tell me why that's important to you. Tell me what you've done.
Oh, wow. Well, first of all, being president of the team has opened my eyes. And we're the biggest business resource group at Stellantis now, and others have grown looking at how our team is operated, really inclusion. So the uncomfortable conversations, I love that because it's something that we were starting to think about, sharing our story, just opening up that discourse between execs and employees. But now it's a thing. Now the company is actually not mandating it, but really encouraging executives to skip level and talk to people of color. They love it. I've had so many execs call me and say, wow, this has been amazing. And we've also helped young executives stay in the company, because sometimes we get this great talent, they want to move up, they don't see opportunity, so they leave. So we try to create a network that is welcoming and less daunting. If they're coming from an all-black college or something and they get into a corporation that looks very different, it takes a little while to assimilate. So many things like that. But number one is being the connective fiber between, let's say, the established management and this young breed of, our group is getting younger and younger, because every young hire of color wants to be part of this group, which didn't happen. It used to be an old network before, and it's become the opposite lately. So it's very powerful. So it's really taught me to open my mind. But it runs itself now. I get the money. I get them visibility to senior management. Now we have our own. We have a dedicated diversity lead in Lottie Holland who runs it. That didn't exist 2 years ago. So the company thought it's so important that they created a new position for diversity and inclusion. So it's notably different, and it feels great watching the company grow up in front of my eyes. Watching it mature and adapt to what the market looks like. America's the most amazing cocktail of humanity, right? To have our company start to look like that is great.
Case in point with the guy on the other end of my line here, for sure. With your rich background, you also saw the movie Hidden Figures, and you said, "Why am I 49 years old and just now hearing about these incredible scientists that helped put a man on the moon?" And it bothered you that there were a lot of gaps in the history of telling that story.
Yeah, and in its history in general, I mean, our history is really missing a lot of information. A lot of the black. There's some information I just learned the other day from Ed Welpern, who's working on a project to tell the story about IndyCar racer, a black back in the 50s. No one knew about.
Who was just put in the Automotive Hall of Fame, actually.
Exactly. I forget his name right now, but there's stuff like that. A lot of amazing stories that they weren't necessarily brushed away on purpose. It's just something people didn't think to talk about it. And one day we'll talk about Lewis Hamilton, right? Today there's haters and lovers of him, but I think it's lost on people the significance of that. The huge what he had to do to get where he is not lost on me.
Yeah, he's starting to tell that story now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Have you met him?
No, one day I hope so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to go right back to the letter that was written, and you said you get a lot of letters with folks asking you for positions who want to get hired right away. They send in a sketch and they say, okay, let's start working. But you have very specific advice for young designers. Mm-hmm. Number one, research your brains out. Number two, and that's in terms of what career you want to go into and the correct pathway. Number two, there's no shortcut. You've got to put in the work. And then number three, go look at other portfolios. Mm-hmm. If you have creative talent and a love for cars, you once said, I suggest you research and visit some of the various art schools around the country. Someday, I just might want to hire you as part of our team.
Yep. Wow. You did your homework. Yes, I'm a big believer in that. I think, some of the letters I get are a little cockier than the one I wrote. They're a little more like, hire me, I'm the best, So first you have to kind of pop burst the bubble a little bit. And then there's some great websites like Car Design News, outstanding places to get information on what's happening in the industry. There's a social media site I just found the other day called the art of clay modeling. It's a social media handle. Didn't even know existed. Amazing. It's another area, by the way, we need talent, is clay modeling. So yeah, I try to kind of get them to think more humbly about their capability and make sure that they realize that there's a lot of, X-Men out there, X-Men and X-women.
For sure. Yeah. Final thing, Ralph, when you look around at the car industry, what inspires you outside of Stellantis?
I love how resilient it is. I really think, first of all, hats off to Elon Musk. I think he's done amazing things to stimulate this conversation about electrification, made it cool. We're coming hard. People say we're in a wait and see. We're more in a wait and nail it, because we operate at a different economic area in the market. So we want to make sure we create cars people that can afford it, we can make money on, right? So we're going to come a little, the perception late to the party, but we're bringing a hell of a bottle of wine. So strap in, because there's going to be, and I think that's what I love about the industry, right? People, one minute you're sneering at it, next minute you're marveled by it, next minute you're sneering at it, then you're celebrating it. So I think it's an industry that keeps reinventing itself. And I judged muscle cars at St. John's a few weeks ago, and it was ironic because I was judging the 70s and the 71s, and amazing the power drop off from 70 to 71 when all the insurance stuff, the EPA regulations,
price of fuel.
Yeah, they didn't know what to do, right? So the muscle car was dead and it was never coming back. And fast forward to today, and then the same conversations I'm hearing now. It's like, oh, these cars are over. It's the last V8 I'll ever get. And I'm telling you, the industry is very resilient and is going to find other ways to thrill you and put a smile on your face. And I think the automotive industry should never forget that that's part of our job too. It's not just mobility, it's exhilaration, it's actualization. So.
You have thrilled us for 30 years now, unbelievably.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for being on the program. Thanks for being our first designer in the program, Ralph.
Well, that's an honor. And I always thank to my team if they're listening. It takes a village. So thank you, Jason.
Well, thank you.
The automobile is one of the most important inventions that revolutionized the modern world. In America, the rich history of car culture runs deep as technology continues to shape the future of the industry. Jason Stein, former publisher of Automotive News, is here to share the stories of people passionate about cars, from industry leaders and innovators to car-obsessed celebrities. Buckle up as Jason takes you inside the boardroom, onto the track, and around the bend on Cars and Culture on SiriusXM Business Radio.